Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to my short film about the golden age of Formula One innovation. Now, this has been a subject I've been very interested in for many years, certainly most of my lifetime. Formula One is, to many people, is a bit boring, but the die-hard fans of Formula One are the ones who can actually remember a time when it was actually quite interesting. Now, Formula One as we know it today kind of started in terms of Grand Prix events anyway. It was started with the championship started in 1948. I think the first race was at Silverstone, in fact. So Britain is integrally linked with this sport. But there's a lot of major developments and technological advancements in Formula One that make it quite an interesting sport, and of course have contributed to road cars a great deal. A lot of things in modern road cars, you know, like semi-automatic gearboxes, multi-valve engines, a huge raft of changes and improvements in terms of materials, using aluminium and then carbon fibre in cars today. It's not that uncommon. In some high-end cars you see the entire car monocoque is made of carbon fibre, and this is all developed to Formula One. But anyway, to put this in some historical context, I'm not going to give you a complete breakdown of the whole history of technological developments. That would be boring and too long. But the basic developments were, first of all, when they started moving the engines from, instead of having it in front of the driver, which they had kind of before the war, and they moved them behind, and then they started to make instead of having a chassis, the likes of Colin Chapman brought out one of his Lotus models where he actually bolted the engine to the front of the car without a separate chassis, and then they bolted the suspension and the wheels to the engine and gearbox at the back. This is a major step forward because it made the car basically kind of stiffer, and it made it lighter. So a big advancement. Chapman from Lotus, he was then probably the big innovator in that era, because he also then invented the aerodynamic wings, which you see on all racing cars pretty much today, track racing cars, single seaters. And of course a lot of others as well. But he invented wings, and they sprouted wings in the 1960s, these Formula One cars, and they were pretty awful to look at, some of them, because the famous one, I think it was the Lotus, was it LS49, where it had wings on these great big mounting stalks that were literally about 5 or 6 feet high. And of course they broke. Graham Hill had an accident where his broke off. I think it was at the Spanish Grand Prix at Montjuic at Barcelona, and that was a near miss for him, I'll tell you. But anyway, they were quickly banned, having them on these high stalks. But then as we get a little bit more like they are today, and we got racing cars with a wing at the front and wings at the back. Until, and this is where the story gets interesting, until the mid-1970s. Now, this is when the really fascinating aerodynamic advance was discovered, because they've been playing with the wings, and the idea of the wing principle, of course, is it's the reverse of what you get on an aircraft. Excuse me. On an aircraft, we have the principle of the wing creates a lift, and the lift is generated by the air passes above and below the wing, and where the more shaped side of the wing, which in an aircraft is on the top, the air flows faster and creates low pressure, which lifts, has this effect of lifting it up, which is how airplanes work. What the guys in Formula One, Colin Chapman, did was they realised that if they turned the wing upside down, of course, then they had this low pressure zone lift, but downwards toward the ground, which pulls the car down and enables more grip, and therefore a lot more speed. Now, this was an understood principle, and in the mid-70s, early mid-70s, all the racing cars were having these wings. But this is the really important part of the story. The big leap forward was, it actually started about 1969, I think it was, and it's the guys at BRM who later became employees at Colin Chapman's Lotus. Tony Rudd, who was an aerodynamicist then, and Peter Wright, I think he was the team manager at BRM, they then ended up at Lotus in the mid-70s, and they'd already done some experimentation with these wings in the wind tunnel. I think it was down at the university down near London, I forgot the name of the place where they do the aircraft, Farnborough, I think. And basically they were messing around again in the wind tunnel and experimenting with these wings, and they started putting wings and thinking, what could we put a wing under the car, not just in front at the back, under some parts of the side, like the side pod where the radiator are, put a wing underneath there, see if that has the same effect, and it did. But then, almost by accident, they noticed that if they closed off the side with what later became known as skirts, a sliding skirt in fact, so that the thing would move up and down with the bumps, they then created a Venturi tunnel under the car, and this was a big low pressure zone and really pulled the car down onto the track. And this is where I come in, because I'm very interested in this subject, and I'm going to do some models. I've already done one. As you can see here, we have the Lotus 79. Now this was the game changer in Formula 1. They already brought out this principle in 77 with the Lotus 78. This is where it gets a little confusing if you haven't followed it before. They used to have a year ahead. So in 77 they're running a car called the 78. Anyway, the 78, the first version, was a simple version. They hadn't quite got the shaping correctly, and the side skirts were a bit crude and kept breaking. But a year later, they basically purified this design into this, what we have here. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so you can get a better look at this rather important car, which is the Lotus 79. And my zoom's not working too well today, so we'll go with the big one. Here we are. Now ignore the one at the top, the box, that's the later model we'll talk about in a moment. But the 79, basically, was absolutely amazing. I mean, first of all, I think it's a very beautiful looking car. Extremely slippery aerodynamically, very, very clean, low drag. And this is the beauty of the aerodynamics. So what you've basically got here is you've got this area of the side pod here. Underneath you have this shaped zone, and the air goes underneath, gets squeezed. Here you may be able to see there's a sort of a matter colour, which is the side skirt, which is the sealing strip, stops the air from escaping. So the air passes in the front, gets squeezed into this like a squeeze bore effect for the air, Venturi tunnel, and then evacuates at the back at very high speed, and it accelerates, and this is what creates the low pressure. So let's go back a little bit. This was groundbreaking, and in Formula 1 it basically swept all before it. The car was introduced, I think it was about the second or third race of 1979. Sorry, 78. It's called the 79, again, confusing. So 1978 was the year it came out, and it was the second or third race that this car came out, and it just swept away the opposition. Most of the opposition were using the same engine, apart from the Ferraris and the Alfa Romeos. And the Renault, of course, at the time, the Renault Turbo was in Formula 1. But with the same engine, you had no chance against this thing, because this thing was probably going around the corners maybe 15 to 20% faster than everything else. So its lap times came down dramatically, and it was very competitive. So the other teams realised that they had been caught sort of with their trousers down. There's no way they were quickly going to be able to build their own ground effect car, which is what it's called, ground effect. That's the principle, where the thing is sucked close to the ground. So this is when it was a very interesting time, because Bernie Eccleston, who was the Formula 1 Constructors Association boss, so this is like an association of the team members, especially the British teams, and he represented all the people like Williams and Lotus and Brabham, who he owned the Brabham team, so he had a bit of a vested interest, you could say. They realised that they were getting outclassed. Their Alfa Romeo flat 12 engine was quite powerful, but it had very poor aerodynamics because it was very, very wide. It was a boxer engine with horizontally opposed pistons. It was low, which was good, but it was wide, which is bad. So they couldn't really have these ground effect tunnels, and they were being beaten regularly by the Lotuses. The two Lotus drivers, Mario Andretti and Ronnie Peterson, these guys were absolutely just dominating Formula 1 completely, a bit like Mercedes do today, I guess. And they were winning 1-2 in almost every race, apart from when there was a breakdown. So Eccleston, who owned the Brabham team, he recently brought in a young designer, South African guy, called Gordon Murray. Now Murray is quite well known these days because he's been involved in projects for McLaren. He worked for McLaren Formula 1 and then he built the McLaren F1 road car. He's also built an electric car and one or two other things he's been involved in, including the new TVR. I mean, the guy is a genius in the mould of Colin Chapman, for sure. Anyway, he had an idea, and a very, very naughty one. And I have here a very interesting book, which is all about it actually. The Brabham BT46, this is the car that they were racing in 1978, and the 46B. B for bad, badass, yeah. But the B is also known as the fan car, and the reason it's known as the fan car, as you might imagine, is that Murray essentially had the idea of finding a way to get the suction and grip down onto the ground without, you know, the aerodynamics advantages of the Lotus, and he brought out the Brabham fan car. Here we have it. Just bring you in for a slightly better view. So here we have the fan car, complete with its fan, which you can probably just see at the back. I'm having a little trouble with my autofocus, which is not uncommon. So he basically put a huge fan on the back, closed off with side skirts, as you can probably see at the side here. Here. And what this did was it sucked the car down onto the ground, and it just absolutely flew. It flew. It was very clever and simple because it was driven directly off the shaft from the gearbox, so there was very little in the way of, you know, mechanical inefficiency or losses. This thing was unbelievable. I mean, when it was first revealed, people thought it was a bit of a joke in the pit lane, until Niki Lauda took it out on the circuit. Niki Lauda and John Watson were the two drivers, and they were qualifying and practicing with the tanks full of petrol to make the car as heavy as possible, because they knew it was so fast. They'd already done some testing at Brands Hatch and it was just like lightning, and it was faster than the Lotus. So this thing was a real step forward, but there was always a danger with this thing that it would pick up gravel or odd stones from the racetrack and spew them out the back. By the way, here you can see the reason I'm talking about all this is that we have some interesting models to build in the next 12 months. And then we've got the Fujimi version here of the BT46B, in which there are one or two quite handy photos. Here we go. We've got. Oops, very good with that. There we go. You can see the back of the car, which is the interesting part of this vehicle, with the fan. So it would. There was two dangers. One is that the thing would break and the blades would spit backwards, and they're, I don't know, it's rotating at about 30,000 revs or something, you know, because I think the gearbox revs are a lot higher than the engine. But anyway, it was very impressive, and it qualified on pole position. Second position. I think qualified second, but this only because it had the tanks full. I think it was second and third on the grid from memory. But anyway, we have I should read the book, shouldn't I? Because I have the book here, and here we go into some significant details of the vehicle. Here it is, complete with its. In this photograph here, you can see it's got the dustbin lid, literally a dustbin lid, plastic dustbin lid, to cover it up from prying eyes, which didn't obviously stop anybody taking photographs of it on the circuit. There's another shot there, the non-vented lid, and that's the Mark 1 dustbin lid. Here's a better photo. Here we go. That's a great shot of the actual fan there, right here. Anyway, Niki Lauda, there he is, the Rat as they used to call him, nickname. I mean, this car was just unbelievable. In the Swedish Grand Prix, after a few laps, it caught up to Mario Andretti, and there's actually a photo here. It is photo here of it in this picture. It catches him, and then it passes him easily, and it just leaves him. You know, he's in a class of its own. I think it won the race by 40 odd seconds. So very, very dominant vehicle indeed. Our friend here, the Lotus 79, was left gasping in its wake. But the other drivers were not happy. The other teams were not happy. And ultimately there was a big row about this, whereby Colin Chapman went to Bernie Eccleston and said that if you don't withdraw this car, everybody's going to have to build these fans, and the the cornering forces on the drivers are very, very high, and it's going to lead to accidents, especially if the fan was suddenly to brake mid-corner when they're perhaps going at 20% quicker than normal. Not enough downforce, it would just go straight on and into the barrier, and there'd be fatalities for sure. And it would cost a huge amount for everybody to copy this design. So, much to Gordon Murray's anger and disgust, this thing was, Eccleston called him into the office and said, look, I want to get everybody on board in this Formula One association, of which of course he ended up being the president of the F1 organisation. And he was after that, and he was more interested in that than he was winning the races, and he won the race. They just dominated it, and it was quite clear that if this car continued for the rest of the 6 months of the season, it was going to win the championship, even against the mighty Lotus 79. And Eccleston said to Gordon Murray, I'm sorry, we've had our day in the sun, we've had glory. And there's a shot here of a very, very amusing shot actually of Nicky Lauda at the end spraying the champagne. It's not a very big photo unfortunately, but he's spraying the champagne, and he's got Ronnie Peterson, I think Mario Andretti's engine overheated, he broke down. He's got Riccardo Patrese, and he's got Ronnie Peterson looking extremely irritated because they've just been absolutely blitzed by this incredible car. And you can see there some of the mechanism and the cooling systems for the fan electronics. A remarkable piece of engineering by any standards, and a very clever innovation. So that was withdrawn, and the rest of the season they had to run with the standard car, which is actually seen here, as you can see in the shots at Monaco. Does not have the fan, and it has more the conventional rear, which is actually seen in this photo here, with no fan at all. So that was that, and Lotus won the championship brilliantly. So, very interested by all these things. I am going to be producing my own fan car. As you can see, I've already done this is the Tamiya 120th Lotus 79. It's a brilliant kit, recommend that very highly, beautiful. I'm going to be doing the Fujimi, this is going to be my next project. You may have seen my other video with the Spitfire, that's the longer term project for the rest of the year. This is going to be my next and last project before the Spitfire. So I just let you know that I have already done some preliminary spraying, because it's white this sprue, and it's already been sprayed red, so that's all ready. And we've got the main body work. You can see that there's some overspray, that's because it's only half done, so don't worry about that. It'll be fine when it's finished, so we've already got on with that, and that's going to be coming very soon. But for the future, for next year, while I'm on this subject, we should talk about the other two great innovations. So wind forward your mind in Formula One, they have these wing cars or ground effect cars, which are actually relatively simple cars really, but the complicated part is this skirt arrangement that we have, sliding skirts, and sometimes they use the brake. That would cause a lot of problems. So in '79, the year after, it was actually Williams who came to the fore, and they won the championship. Well, Ferrari actually won the championship in '79 by the skin of their teeth against the Williams, because they had a very powerful car and had a kind of semi-ground effect car with skirts. It was a bit like the Alfa, it had a flat 12. And this I think was the last full year that they had the flat 12 engine, because it was just too wide and it wasn't good for aerodynamics. But they managed to win with it with Jody Scheckter and Gilles Villeneuve. And they had a great year, and then the ground effect cars kind of took over. So that after that, Williams dominated everything, and until 1981. Now here we have the Lotus 88, which is a derivative of the 86, which never raced. Now this is a very controversial racing car. You see on the side, I have to forgive the tape. We've got some shots of it on the side. And this is the 1981 Courage sponsored car. This is when the John Player Special was mostly fading out. They kept the black design. Still looks beautiful. And here it's Nigel Mansell at the wheel, you can see. But this was basically banned by the FISA, or the FIA, as they were called FISA at the time. Formula International Sport Automobile, you know. Problem was, and what was so clever about this car, it's a real shame I think it was never allowed, and that the other teams weren't copying it and going forward. That was the style of Formula 1 cars, because what Chapman did to get back his lost supremacy. He basically had two chassis, not one. We had an internal chassis with the driver and the nose and the engine and the gearbox and the wheels, basically like an old style Formula 1 car. And then he has the outer chassis with this side pods rear wing arrangement, and it's suspended independently. So when they go over bumps, the internal chassis with the driver in goes up and down and gives him some suspension, but the exterior does not move. It did have shockers and dampers, but they were very, very stiff. So that remains stiff to the ground to give the air, so it doesn't move around to give the downforce. And the driver has this more comfortable internal, normal, conventional chassis in one car. Remarkable design. So that's something that Chapman introduced, and then everybody said it was cheating because they claimed that the wing and the side system, because they were separate, they were therefore a movable aerodynamic device. I'm not sure about that. To me, the movable part surely is the chassis that the driver sits in. That's the whole point. Anyway, they banned it. Introduced it at Long Beach in 1981. It was banned. They then fought the FIA for 4 or 5 months until the British Grand Prix, and Chapman brought it out again, having slightly revised the design, just tweaked it, still the same principles, and the British Grand Prix was actually administered by the RAC, Royal Automobile Club. They scrutineered it and said it was okay, it passed the scrutineering, was fit to race. And then on Saturday, the FIA, the qualifying day, so they had a day's practice with it on the track. There are photos you can see on the internet of it being practiced by Nigel Mansell and Elio De Angelis, the Italian driver. And then on Saturday, the FIA stepped in and said, if you continue allowing this to qualify and race, the British Grand Prix will be scrubbed of its World Championship status. So Chapman very, very reluctantly withdrew the car, and they actually modified. They had a modified version, which was the Lotus 80. They call it the 87, and the 87 was basically the inner bit with the conventional side pods and the wings fixed to the main chassis. So it was a more conventional design, and they qualified this. But unfortunately, Nigel Mansell, they hadn't had any practice in it. It was a big ask. Mansell didn't qualify, and De Angelis qualified, I think, near the back. I can't remember the position, about 18th, I think. Now, I personally was very upset about this because I went to this event and I was looking forward to seeing this race, and it didn't. I mean, everybody knew already what an amazing design and innovation it was. So clever, so creative thinking. Typical Colin Chapman, a genius for sure, along with Murray. There's only been 2 or 3 geniuses in Formula 1, perhaps the other one is Adrian Newey. We'll talk about him in a second, but this was absolute brilliance, and it was a crime that it wasn't allowed to go ahead, just to see how it competed. Now, today, there are, I think, 3 or 4 of these still left in the world. Classic Team Lotus in Norfolk have got, I think, 2 of them, and there's one in a private collector's hands, and I think there's one in America or Japan. Forgive me, I don't know the exact locations, but some of them are still competed in like track days and classic events, and it's brilliant. It's absolutely fantastic. I would love to see that race. Such a shame. Anyway, that's something I'm going to make. It'll match nicely with the 79. And then I mentioned Adrian Newey. So finally, we move on to Adrian Newey, who of course today works for Red Bull and designed a lot of their championship-winning cars, and they won 4 titles. But finally, the other part of the golden age, I think it was 1991-92 when Newey went to Williams, and he designed a March in 1990, which was beautiful and very similar in shape. In fact, perhaps maybe more beautiful than this one. But he created this car for the Williams team with very advanced aerodynamics. Coupled with a semi-automatic gearbox, which was very similar to the Ferrari style, but it also had anti-lock brakes, and it had some traction control, and it had active suspension. Now this made this car absolutely remarkable in terms of performance, and Nigel Mansell came back after being 2 years at Ferrari, came back to Williams in '91, and in '92, of course, he won the World Championship finally, because he should have won it 2 or 3 times, and he'd had terrible reliability problems with Ferrari and Williams previously, and accidents and things, blowing his tyre and hurting his back in Japan, etc., etc. With this car, he just couldn't lose, quite frankly, and he didn't, and he wrapped the championship up in August, which I think is the earliest it's ever been done. Such was the dominance of this car. I think he won the first six races, up to Monaco when he got picked by Senna, only because, of course, he had this puncture. Anyway, that's another story. But this car was incredible. I remember at the British Grand Prix in 1992 reading some accounts by Patrick Head, who was the Williams technical boss, and somebody asked him, why is Nigel Mansell so much faster than his teammate Riccardo Patrese, who was also a good driver and was really having some great successes in this car as well, but just couldn't really match Mansell, especially places like Silverstone. And Head said one of the reasons that Mansell was superior was that Mansell would go into a corner and toward the end of the straight, most drivers will lift off slightly and then dab the brakes and then turn in. But Mansell would lift off slightly and then reapply the throttle right to the floor. And because of the aerodynamics of the car, this would create a big back pressure through the exhaust and the under tray at the back of the car. And this would lead to more grip and more downforce. And this is why he was so dominant. Anyway, an absolutely amazing car. Adrian Newey, another great genius in the mould of Murray and Chapman. Lots of aerodynamic innovations, and a very, very clever guy indeed. So that is the golden age of Formula One, and I'm going to model these 3, starting immediately with this one. This will be built in February, and we're going to be enjoying that. It's something I've wanted to build for a long, long time. Love Formula One, but especially this interesting era where these have all got a story to tell, and a very interesting story, each and every one of them. And I'm going to be running through these in the next 12 months. This one will be immediate, and the other 2 at the end of the year, early next year. In the meantime, if you found this an interesting video, I hope you did, I can strongly recommend a couple of books: the Lotus 78 and 79, The Ground Effect Cars. This is an astonishing book. It even goes into the later developments, including the 88, the twin chassis car. It's all here, showing exactly how the 2 chassis operated, the outer chassis and the inner chassis, and lots of photographs there. Picture of Nigel Mansell and Elio De Angelis at Silverstone I just talked about, and it also talks about the troubled 1979 season, which didn't go well for them at all, the season between, when they had this new car called the Lotus 80, which was perhaps a little bit of a step too far. It was this longer, wider car, and the whole car was a great big tunnel underneath, but it wasn't very stable. They had all sorts of problems with it. Mario Andretti said it was awful. Anyway, it's a fascinating book with some wonderful photographs in it. I just cannot recommend that book highly enough. So if you're interested in this subject, please get yourself this one. It's by John Tipler, and it's published by, who is it published by? Crowwood.com. And this wonderful thing, now you can't get this too handy in Europe, I'm afraid. You're going to have to go to Japan, or I think the States, for this one. And this is one of these, I think it's a Japanese Joe Honda Racing Pictorial Series, number 8. And it's got, as you saw, it's got some absolutely astonishing photos. And it does also include the 79 season, where you've got Niki Lauda and the arrival of Nelson Piquet, with their big ground effect car, the 48, the Pamela Brabham 48, which was another rather ungainly beast, a bit like the Lotus 80 just mentioned. Wasn't overly successful either, but the 46B, the fan car, that's the one you really want it for. It's a great book. So there you go, a couple of interesting things for you to consider. So if you're interested in Formula One, I hope you enjoyed the video. And please comment if you've seen any of these cars or you've experienced anything to do with this. I'd be very interested to hear from you. Please comment below the video, and in the meantime I will get building this fan car before I get on with my Spitfire, and I will be sure to post the results of that with a video perhaps in 3 or 4 weeks time, perhaps early March, something like that, 2019. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed, and thank you very much for watching, and thanks for your time. Leave me a like, leave me a comment if you like, always welcome. And thanks very much, and have a great day. Cheers now. Bye bye.